Ane nangzu, shoke, tanga jele kangla, shen jila tuyne drupa mado kangla ma tuyaba rangwangdo drupa siya, rangwangdo drupa chiyo mares. Jine, di kwa rangwangzo jik dine, she rangwangdo drupdeba ina, ane kyun kari yungur sene, delyan tongpanyi jeba che ne, rangwangdo ma drupa tongpanyi toyongdo, ane di, ane ngobodi me chukdos. Jine, ane dine zan tongpanyi tobo lodo kulip chagido siya. 나네 안 동방이 또 별로디 뭐부 집이 규차기도 있어. 그래서 세상에 규단기 가래 마도 랑문의 주바지요 말레스. 세상랑문의 주바요 말. 랑문의 주바 있나? 안에 동방이 제바지 랑문의 마주바 동방이 또는데 안에 랑문의 주바디 뭐버디 매바 차로도 와서지. 제사 매바 통도 왔어. 매바 통도 통이도 불러디 뭐는 고보라 꿀팁 차로도 그세. 괜히 지용 그래서. 대견 이바 가려운 거서는 나 동반이 또 별로디기 강라마도 랑문의 주바데 통고요 말했어. 마동안자 대신년에 동반이 마동년라 랑문의 주바지 유예바시. 동반이 또르도 매바 차로베나 동반이 또 별로디 랑문의 주바 가서 랑이 뭐보디기 집이 매바수에 그 규차로도 되네 괜찮네 니요레스 되네 인자 다 가리어스네 근데 강라에 맞도 랑문의 주파세디 자기네 요 말에서 maybe 도시네 쇼게 디고라서 셰로 다들 랑문의 주파세 되기불 랑문의 집바로다 집부지가로와
Good afternoon. This morning then we spoke about that we looked at in this verse that if phenomena were inherently existent, that would have consequences. Because the view that is being challenged is that phenomena are both inherently existent or exist by way of their own nature, as well as being dependent on causes. If that were the case, something existed by way of its own nature and was dependent on causes, then the first consequence would be that things that exist would be deprecated or eradicated or denied. And the second consequence would be that the wisdom realizing emptiness would eradicate something that had been found to exist before. So due to these two consequences, it's seen that it is illogical that phenomena can be both inherently existent and dependent arisings.
안디네 인자당 저기 현실의 되네 주바 현실의 되네 주고를 제가 디네 인자당 저기 동아시아당 강아시아당 요한디네 아니 현실의 되네 주고를 현来마되바 강来마되바 가야 말했어 제가 대화당 아니 지 야보디기네 간데신이 디수이네 현실의 되네 용고를 제가 현来마되바 가야 말했어 디네 인자당 아주 셈이야 강아시 체베이네 대저 강아디게 내가 지kin 현실의 되네 그 매버서야 요라 탑시야 요라스 그 랑이 천이 줍되어 있나 아니 그 교원균에 줘야 막 당보 가르치나 나가려마도 매버서 투야 말했어 진짜 랑이 천이 마주버 인장 긴 현실을 되어 인장 규탄 긴 현을 되네 그 매버서야 요라스지 먼저 디디 다 그네스에스네다 되네기 아니 랑이 천이 마주바인자 유단 견현을 되네고 맞 동아디게 슈충 다야다 매버서 요래서지
Recognizing that phenomena can't be inherently existent as well as dependent arisings, we come to, not only do we see that the contradictions or the consequences of such a misunderstanding or a wrong view, one comes to also recognize that phenomena are nevertheless dependent arisings and not existent by way of their own nature or inherently existent. And what this means is that phenomena can change. All our problems and difficulties come about independent on other phenomena. They are not independent, but so too does all our happiness, all our wanted situations. These two are not independent, but come about dependent on other phenomena. What this means is that all good qualities that one longs for can be developed, and all faults on one's continuum can be completely eradicated. This is because phenomena are not inherently existent. If they were so, if something existed by way of its own nature, that nature would be unchanging, and therefore it could never change. But this is not the case.
La delia set up which carriers and neck up set up delia, Mazu Shenji Ganga and Lubashada Ganga Shu, the Sayatuyata, Chick, Rawani meeting Ganga Shu, the Dinike some down to Kabla, and then the Ganga de Chunchun Risha, and big some Losile, Leata, Dini Zada, Susi Ganga de Chunchun Tongu, and Diziki Ganga de Shiki Shibu Yode, and the Mark just Chun say to Yada. Da Shenji Ganga de Be, Chimboton, Ninja, the Be. Holiday, Consucale, Shucale, chair, the Inji, some big some of Leo, just a Nika de Chunju Residenza, Ni Consulia Robachena, Consukanga de Segu to Sempe Leo, or Sosora Tumagi, Darling, Serving Yamadi, or Essence, and the Jinga to Shoke di Gorma, Dustini, Chevaro.
As one hears teachings and reflects on them, coming to understand dependence arising better, we can apply it to our everyday life. Because we see that our way of thinking impacts so how we experience events. So when we have problems, and we perhaps have great problems or many at the same time, these may well overwhelm us. And every thought is about our problems, and these problems and difficulties in our life, we can allow to dominate our way of thinking. And this only serves to make our problems grow, to increase our suffering. But when we recognize this process of dependency, we can see that by changing our involvement, a different result can come about. So rather than fixating on myself and my problems, remind ourselves, as an ordinary being in samsara, unwanted circumstances will befall one. Moreover, if we lift our vision up from our own circumstances to the others in the world, perhaps what we observe in the news, and we can see just how others are suffering in ways far worse than we've ever suffered. This can serve to help us step back from being so self-obsessed and recognize how difficult the lives of some others really are. And this gives us the mental space to see our own situation in a more realistic perspective. And through thereby, with now a slightly more relaxed mind, a mind not so self-obsessed, we can think, I can deal with this. I've perhaps dealt with similar situations in the past. I've perhaps dealt with an onslaught of many problems such as these in the past, and I can deal with it again. And this time, I will be more skillful. And I will deal with this in a skillful way, not allowing my mind to be overwhelmed. And by developing skills in these difficult circumstances, transforming problems onto the path, or taking them onto the path, through this merit, I dedicate it to those who are suffering in ways that is, for them, truly overwhelming. And in this way then, we develop compassion for others, and we are determined to continue our spiritual development so that we can be of ever greater benefit to others.
지사 라왕기 끼요 말레스 라왕기 끼요 말레스 가서네 다 라왕기 끼와 말레라도 긴 끼요로 봐다 끼와래데 있는 라왕기 끼와 말레라도 아니 가르친 끼와래시 현기 원기 끼와래사지 현기 원기 끼와래서 지사 현기 원기 끼와래서 현기 가르선 gyudan jinde, chesan gyudan jingi wangi 제부디 깨완자 아니 현기 왕 깨와 랑기 왕기 깨와 마 랑고네 깨와 말해서 다 텐지 불루라 주시기슈 간데시나 깨와디 랑원네 깨와 말해서 랑왕이 깨와 말해 랑원네 깨와 지바 랑원네 깨와 말해 랑왕이 깨와 말해서 아니 기도 가르쳐 주신 현기 왕기 깨와를 해서 그러다
The Prasangika view, from the perspective of the Prasangika, all results come about independent on causes. There's no result that arises independent of causes. So therefore, results come about independence on other, namely causes, or you can say they come from other, independence of other from other. They do not come about from themselves, but from others. So within this, as an audience, and I'll just talk from the translator's perspective, from the perspective of the audience, the word for freedom is self-powered or from itself. That's the word for freedom. So Prasangikas say, a result doesn't come from itself, which means, to use the same words, it has no freedom. Yeah, it doesn't come rang itself, wang powered. It's not self-powered, which is the word for freedom. Rather, it's other powered. It comes from something other than itself, namely a cause. So when we hear freedom or from itself, then we should understand it's the same word.
강바지 미지게 강바지 메타 따바인다 메타 나셔와 다디 강바디 메타 따야딜레 미딜레 당한 저기 지당한 저기 시리가라 라왕 토네 메타 따와다 라왕 메네 라왕 메바 메타 따와 니구루와 용루와 진짜 강바지 메타 당기루와 지당 메자루와 메타 따스 메레야 직주고 메잡두가블 라왕게 메자야 지당 라왕도 라왕 메바지 메자야 니구루와 Rawa Mebas and Mishanda, Kuran Jimmy, Meja or Majavina, Kuran Sugi, said they get the Mendados, Kenny Shashavina, go Javak, Meja, Dewa, Zawagine, Yomarate, Ina, Odusino, Majavina, Kosuenza, Di Shengi, Wanga, Shugin Chine, and the called Magic, may come with the Mejarua, Di Rawa Meba Meja, Chagura, Chida, Chidimiki Shidrua, Diagic. 刚做的说啦，那个你看过的没吧？是没得当什么刚做的什么东西，看过没得当的，看过的没接下来呢？这让王给没接吧的话的，这上的没接他看过没接的啦，那让王没吧没接接他，那让王现在没接你吃个多的，我说今天就几点没接现在主要的。
So again, just before I repeat, say what Genda said now, I will just repeat what I said before. The word for freedom is also the word for self-powered as opposed to other-powered. So results come from are other-powered. In other words, they come from a cause. They don't come under one's own power. So remember, self-powered and freedom will be the same word. So now to come to what Geshe has just said. Let's take a situation of where someone burns down a house. They intentionally burn down a house. So this person may intentionally burn down the house with freedom or under their own volition, or without freedom, not under their own volition. So how do they do so with freedom or under their own volition? Their choice, and they happily burn the house down. But if they don't do it with freedom, not under their own volition, that would be perhaps, if they were made to do so, perhaps at gunpoint, they were forced to do so. So this is how we would generally talk in society, that someone did something with freedom or without freedom.
ko rawa me ba korong me ja de ba za gine me ba je mi shen da ge nyu shu to ne kang ba de le me ja me de ci de call it Pesa, so that come with the seasons and because the Jiggy, Semilia, Yolana, Yungrumato, other met Pea, or Juice of the Galana Yimar, middle. She's not a Koran, never make your answer, digging middle and Gemma to get Jiggy Shimjuche, Timgan, Tim Yevatan, Chick to Kabla, that was Shimjuche. Middle only a Koran and make a very good Dobazawa, Miss Shanky, new sugar and what made Yapchusha, just a middle and never midus and Kolia and never the Timara. The Geshe Kolia never the bear, Kirkham, made Yapshas, Bedujas and Kol never Junga Taya, that the Loma Junga Taya, never Tavena, D and Tata Matimbachi, Tata Mebachi, Tambo Maimbaru Chagor, that is not the Ninza, and the code never Tevana got to Stambora Maimbaruch. Never matter by the never me to say the co winning to record round Unimevaza, Colia, never me to say never the Tisha Maroi, Yoruba, the negative Gatone.
This person who burned down the house without freedom, who was made to do so, they had no wish to burn down the house, but they were being instructed by someone else at gunpoint to burn down the house. Wasn't their choice. They had no wish to do so. And if arrested, taken to court, one would imagine that this would be taken into account with their sentencing. It is recognized that, yes, you burned down the house, you've acknowledged that, and we accept that you had no wish to do so, you were forced to do so, you had no freedom, you were made to do it. And that should be taken into account in terms of their sentencing. If it were not taken into account, and they were given the standard sentence for arson, this would be seen as grossly unjust and unfair.
Korongi Kangbo Metaya go Deba Junior Mebache, Shangi, New Shugi Wangi, Zewang Tone, Kangba the Meta Danje, Kangba Meva Serba Rede, Ine, Cole Langamba Sayo Marta, Langamba Sayo Mare. Langamba Masawanza, Maombana, Di Tebu, Dungachi, Dunga Shuchimboji, Yungo Mare. Geshe Deniki, Tebu, Dunga Jomba, then Mutumbacha, Kumasa, while Tebu Jomba, then Mutumbacha. Katamu Maima Chagua, Tandi Maima Chagua, Carson, Kamba made Tayo Kunung, Deva Mero, Deva Medi, Deva Meshin or Shangi, Zawan, Tani Metawa, Mejawa and Zang, Kolia, Liang and Basayo Mare. Chesa, Liang about Dunga, Judy Masa Banza, Mahoban and Digi, Jebu, Dunga, Yungu, Dunga Shuchim, Yungu, Banana, Dim Jama Mare, Mutimba, Chesa, Jebu Yayo Mare, Lady Le Masa Banza, Legi, Jebu, Jema, Kolia, Kamba Meta, Tavi. Digi Tebu Dunga Yomachi Yomare, Yungmare, Carson Lesa Yomare. Geshe Le Masa Bane and Dunga Jungu, but Di Tebu Dunga Jombana, then he Guda Tebu and Mutumba Charva, Mutumba Chavaza, Jangdi Maimbaru Chagua, Carson Tim Gitone, Tim Colonese, you Tevena, Mutumba Dadi Maimachara, you Rama Menaya, and called Yeshatavana, called Kazure. Jambu Mevara Chagoro. I did not see the Kokulon, you know, Zawajin made against Shengi, Ram Mevach Metatavene, Lesayamare, Lemasavanza, Dimo, and the Tevuduma Yunguribes, Yungumare, Kisu Yobaina, and Judah Mutumba Charco, it's the Yomare.
Should the person who was forced to burn down the house receive the normal sentence for arson, this would be seen as unjust and unfair, and that the result, the sentence, would not be in accordance with the crime, the cause. And this is similar to the karmic process here. The person who was forced at gunpoint to burn down the house with no wish to do so, whilst they engaged in this action, all the requirements for a complete karma to be accumulated are not there, are not present. Therefore, a complete karmic cause is not accumulated. And thereafter, in the future, should the various ripening conditions be met that would otherwise ripen such a karmic seed, because that karmic seed wasn't fully completed, it will not ripen. So again, from the karmic perspective, because intention was absent, this person had no wish to burn down the building. Whilst they did burn down the building, because the aspect of intention was missing, they therefore did not complete a full or complete karmic action, and therefore will not meet the result of someone who had accumulated a complete karmic action. If the person were to receive the result of having intentionally burned down the house without having done so, then the cause and the result would not be in concordance, because the cause wasn't actually fully completed. So therefore, if the cause is not completed, the result will not come about. Should the person have intentionally burnt down the house, then when they appear in court, they will receive the full sentence for arson, because with freedom, or to use the literal, self-powered, they burnt down the house. So it's use the word intentionally, or with freedom, or self-powered, they burnt down, or under their own power, they burnt down the house. And therefore they would receive a severe sentence. From the perspective of the Dharma, this person who intentionally burned down the house, who wanted to burn down the house, the karmic action was complete, they had the motivation to burn it down, and they did so. So they accumulated the full karmic action, and they will experience a suffering result from this in the future when the ripening conditions are met, and they will experience the suffering result of that karmic seed.
아니 매디 강바데 매바지 치루고와 제사 강바디레 매바야레 치바라 아니 규디레 가르 참고서는 규 매고고래 안데 꿀매 야야기 꿀롱고래 제사 꿀롱하다 규 매다 차상 상여도 강바디 매다 땅고래 제사 델레티네 땅고 제사 라와도 말레스 제사 강바디 매 야야디 바야디 야야디 라와 말에 규단 찐샹라 뛰네 매게고래스 제사 규단 찐샹라 뛰어바데 가르도서 매고고래 매다다요 꿀롱고고래 델레 뛰고래스 아니 제사 매야야디 라왕이 매다 매자와 말레스 샤왕이 자바레스 매 바리아디로와 샹레 뛰고래 샹레 뛰고래 샹레 가를 뛰고서 매자에 꿀롱을 뛰고래 아니 매고고래 꿀롱에나 매매나 매자요 말아 매고고래 꿀롱고고래 제가 꿀롱다 매다 데네를 뛰고래 디 델레 뛰네 아니 매자와 제가 매자와 라왕 자와 말에 매바와디야 라왕이 말에 제가 샹이 왕게 샹이 왕도 그 샹레 뛰네 주바레스 뛰네 자바레스디 아 저기 당을 텐주베셰도 그 매자야 라왕 자와 말에 규단 찐샹라 뛰네 자바레스 지금 당한테 지딘베 계시도 라왕 자바레스 이거 다 책딩이 미팅 바르만 제도와
talking about just the individual who burnt down the house under their own free will. From the perspective of the world, we'd say this person did so under their own volition, with freedom, self-powered, right? So same with freedom or self-powered under their own control, they burnt down the house. No one made them to do it. So they're the person who'll get the long sentence for having burnt down the house. So again, from the perspective of the world, they did it, burnt down the house under their own power, self-power. From the position of the Prasangika, they would say the person did not burn the house under their own power, but under the power of something other. So here we see different term being used, right? From the worldly perspective, we'd say the person burnt down the house under their own power, whereas from the Prasangika point of view, they'd say they burnt down the house, but under the power or influence of something else. So what is this something else that powered or led to the person burning down the house? It was the motivation and the substance, so the fire, these two coming together, the motivation to burn down the house, plus the means to do so, and they burn down the house. So this is the meaning of other powered. The person burnt down the house under the power of other phenomena, and those phenomena will be the intention, the wish to do so, as well as having the means to do so, the fire itself. So that is what the person's activity or behavior was under the control of, their intention and having the means to do so. So Cameron, question answered? Or was the question something other than what I've answered?
The question was, I'm not sure exactly what it got. I think we'll get the answer quite so you got the original question is based around the idea of religion, which I think is what you looked at. I suppose there seems to be a critical point in time where religion takes place. So, for instance, in the case of the person burning down the house, there will be a point in time where they had a choice. Did they make that choice actually at the time or previously? So, for instance, we see that in the case of murder cases, for example. Did the person actually act spontaneously, or did they actually try
So if it's okay with you, should we leave it now?
Yeah.
And then you turn this around a bit, and in a fortnight, ask again, or in a month, ask again?
That sounds good.
Okay.
Excellent. Thank you.
Okay.
The answer. Yeah.
예, 다다네. 예. 아데네 안주 쇼게된 마무티시나. 아데레 찌들이야. 데니 다쟁을에 수르도 내년 만인 대실지 된기. 태니들라 넘버를 찌미자스. 가사디 찍다 어디. 데다와 강시 오보디다. 강시 오보디다 남제나 데니 다쟁을에 수르도 내년 만인 대실지 된기. 태니들라 넘버를 찌미자스.
Let's return to the text. So we're going to come to the second verse then on page 16. For that reason, when phenomena are analyzed, other than having emptiness as their nature, nothing is found to abide. Thus, truths of worldly convention should not be thoroughly analyzed.
강실은 오보디다 남제나 세대당한 주의 대시 쇼셰반에 오보 수당 자당 질라서버 뒤지기 최근에 이나 대소 차상 등한 주의 바 달에 깨와레베 신뢰 깨와레베 간스 깨바레스 포슈 파 심주 체지 파 제바제바이나 제바제바이나 안에 달에 깨와단 신뢰 깨와서 신뢰 깨와서디 그래서 베네 그 랑문이들 랑의 친유주비 규현실에 되는 깨와서 그러와 랑의 친유주비 규현실에 되는 깨와 그래서 신뢰 깨와 랑의 친유주비 규 랑이 천유주비 규칙을 깨와야는다 현례 깨와서 내징아서 현례 깨맞게 세야지 랑이 천유주비 규칙을 깨맞게 지시고와 랑이 천유주비 제 랑이 규디 천유주비 해 대래 제부디 깨와야는 랑세데 랑이 천유주비 규세데 강라에 맞되고 랑문이 주비가 규디라시고와 랑이 천유주비 규는 딜레이 되는 거고와 랑이 천유주발라비도 강라 야마도바 랑원이 주바디마 데니치는 뭐 숨고로와 제사 랑의 천이 주비 귤랍디 강라 야마도바 랑원이 주비 귤와 데니치를 제부지 기비에 바이나 아니 현례 깨바리 엘레워 제사 제부데 가지고 현례 깨바리 해서 돼 나도 부게야 돼 현례 깨바리선 부고는 신 아마지리 깨와로 신리 깨와 디키 시고 말와 다데 누구디 깨여도 누구는 신 사본지리 깨와로 디키 시고 말 신리 깨와 랍디 갈라고 그러서는 신세디 랑원의 주베 랑의 천이 주베 규실라서 랑의 천이 주베 규실라 제우기 리베스네 기가 말해서 왔다 제사디 신리 깨와 제상 모비기 뒤지기 최 간데 이나 아주게 제바 지뒤갑라 간스 기구도선 달에 깨와다 생각 신일 셔바 달에 깨와다 현례 깨와세 제상 달에 깨와다 현례 깨와지 저 자와기니 니고 말아 니저 제바체도 달에 깨와다 현례 깨와도 동바디 기구마 동상데 도고마도 다단 현례 깨와 자와기니 니고 말아 예서 제상 가치는 오버디다 남제나 시대 이제 제가 말에 곧 나중 뭐지 분법 빼내라 지 뭐버지 자로버지 수로버지 시소지 디간스 깨바레베 달에 깨바레베 현례 깨바레베스 두 제바지도 갑라 달에 깨와이나 안에 규마지 규두스는 요고 그래서 그냥 마셔로다 제가 달에 끼 맞게봐 통고 가서는 달에 맞게봐 되는 현례 맞게봐서 랑이 천유주비 규칙에 맞게봐 통고래 제가 맞게봐 통고래
Looking at the first line, for that reason, when phenomena are analyzed, here we are establishing whether phenomena have arisen from self-powered or from themselves or from under the power of others or influence of others. What we see, though, is that phenomena cannot arise from their own cause, which is from a cause which is established by way of its own defining characteristics, because if a cause were established by way of its own defining characteristics, it couldn't produce a result. Similarly, a result could not come from such a cause, nor could such a result be established by way of its own defining characteristics. So whichever way one investigates, one comes to realize that phenomena are empty of being established by way of their own defining characteristics.
Deni geta jeba chene deni dale jeba na shenle kiwi tongba jima to toba insa ani deni daje ngwele sidu chesa deni daje ngwele sidu ngwe duji ge che tamje kande sina donda la rashin yu tupe tongba ngo rashin yu tupe tongba de so deni daje rashin yu tupe tongba ma to don rashin rang chinyi tuba da don da mo tuba sa de me ba de ese Rangi Tsinyu Juba, the Don number Juba, the Ranshin Juba said the Mabari, as you were Ranshin Juba, don't be tiny cheers. Mobocadesina called Ranshin Juba, don't body, Rangi Tsinyu Juba, don't body, Mado, the Rangi Tsinyu Juba, your mother, Ranshin Juba, your mother.
What is being referenced in this verse is what we looked at in the previous weekend on page, I think it was 14, in the diamond slithers, where production causes production from self, production from other, and production from both self and other were refuted. So this is what is being referred to in terms of production from self and other. So it's going back to the presentation on the diamond slithers. So here, in one's analysis, one is investigating that production cannot be from a self that is established by way of its own defining characteristics, or another that is established by way of its own defining characteristics. Rather, all phenomena are empty of inherent existence. Other than having emptiness, or emptiness of inherent existence as their nature, that is the nature of all phenomena, empty of inherent existence. There is no phenomenon to be found, whether self or other, that is inherently existent or established by way of its own defining characteristics. And then just to add, in the first line, the word phenomena, here is also the word for functioning things, so it refers to impermanent phenomena.
다신 제베 채나 가서 뒤주셔 간데 나 뭐 라신 유튜브 동배 다니지 마도 돈 넘버 주바 라신 유튜브다 랑이 친 유튜브서 매바로 와스 매반자 추르도 세디 아니 유 그랑이 원이 주비가 랑이 친 유튜브 규딜에 규현지래 되네 제리간지 아니 녀야요 말해서 되니기 제부지 요요 말해서니 녀냐만
So what we start with in our second line, the word other than, it's at the end of the Tibetan. So Ken was just explaining it means other than. So what's been established, or presented rather, in the second line, is that the only nature phenomena has is emptiness, empty of inherent existence, empty of being existing by way of its own defining characteristics. No phenomenon exists by way of its own defining characteristics, or nature, or essence.
아니 예마이 다디 치를 세드 제자당 원주도 치네 고 나즈도 제바시 심주 셰드갑라 강라에 가서 마트에 바제 장원이 줍티긴 규제라 아니 제부지에디 니금도 민도와 제자 맨자 뒤지게 취해 간데 시네야 강라에 마트가 장원이 줍티에서 민도 매반자 민도 매반자한다 다디 대시 셰바데 술리 럽고르스네 우마란주버 럽고르다디 나야데 뭐 텐주비게다 반다와도 우마란주버 럽고르바 제가 우마란주버데 가르서 와서 된나바 마주바레 마도 랑이 친유 주바레 럽고르바 제자네 된나바 마주바레 덴바르 마주바레스 된나바 마주바레 덴바르 마주바레스 아네 라신 유주바레 랑이 친유 주바레스 켈링고르바 This is sugar, the shares, Juba shares, ma. And that Casore, Rashing in Juba said that I'm singing Juba in Jiba, killing Jiruada. Then Dember Juba said, don't number Majuba, don't number Juba said they could Jiba killing or then the Umarangi Bigas and Chue Tamje, Kanisina, don't number Madubare, Demba Madubares. In a Rashing you do it so hard, saying near yours, Rashing you do it, and it's you to put a person, saying near your essay, or the Tishigorova. Rangi Tsingi Juba Nijibache. Temper Juba, don't number Juba Nijibache, Rangi Bigi Cavalchin Shiware. Umatayubala Shigala Cavariomarwa. Rangi don't number Juba. Don't number Juba. Oh. Umaragi be Rangi Tsingi Juba Yore, Rashing Juba Yore, Labor. You be Jimsen Garson, Pat Doctor Pakanis to Jebachin Zena, Chinia to us. Now, and the Cario Mars and Denver Juba Yomare, Rashing don't number Juba Yomares, Carson the Palufa, Matawala, you have my Lufa Tau, who is the Matapachi Yomares. That near Rangi be decaying Atisha, that jail tend you to Halapta the Pala was yellow.
Sorry, the translator was just getting all the words really mixed up. So, Genla had to repeat it many times. So, to repeat what was said this morning, and then Genla will give the commentary afterwards, that according to the Svatvantika, because this verse is once again, Chandakirti, it's writing from the perspective of the Prasangika to refute the Svatvantikas. So the Svatvantikas hold that phenomena do exist by way of their own nature or their own characteristics or essence. They do exist in this way. But this is the view of the Svatvantika. But they also say phenomena do not exist truly or ultimately because they do require imputation by mind. If a phenomenon were truly or ultimately existent, it would not require imputation by mind. But phenomena do require imputation by mind, and therefore no phenomenon exists truly, but they exist by way of their own nature. So this is the Svatvantika view that is being refuted here by the Prasangika.
And then you begin that the Temper Juba Sada, Rashin Juba Sada, Rangi Tsingi Juba Sada, Chaza, the Chadon number Jubalana, Chibichia, the Chaza, Gala, Maduba, Rangoni, Palu, Shabal, Marangoni, Jutu Indela, Rangi Tsingi Juba, Don number Juba, Rashin Juba, and educate Temper Juba Chaza, Don Jiba Chadua.
The Prasangika presentation for us is a little simpler, as this distinction isn't made. The Prasangika would assert that all these terms are synonymous. There is no difference between true existence and inherent existence. There is no difference between being established by way of their own defining characteristics and ultimate existence. These are synonymous according to the Prasangika, and they dispute the distinction that the Svatvantika make.
Koran rang ngwe drup de che le pa da ba de ni ga de ni so le so ni so rang ngwe ne koran da se xi ji koran pa zin de xi ji ye ba che ane ye ba ji pa le pa da ba de ni ye cho go le ma do xi ji me ba ji le ka sta go le da go yo ma ro se go de ming da ya la ming da se xi ji go ro wa se je san xi me na ming da ya ho yo ma de se me ba ji la ming ka da go da yo ma de se je san ten ji bu cho no zhu shu le le go de rang ji bi 제가 되네자 우마라지고 그런 거 되바디 가르선다 최디게 간에 최간에 시네 코로나랑 코로나에 따던 제네 파니에 유리베 직지 니네 안 될야 안 뢰파 따고레 스타네 안 따고레 되네자 랑웅에 주바도 뢰파 따바 니错的你错话的嘛都니가 뭐错吧就要嘛嘞但랑웅에 주베네 뢰파 마다나 그 미치 여베네 콜 민 비치 치링 세야지 마다바는 고 치링이 자요 말했어. 파 미지여반 시지여나 홀 치링세 미지 민다바는 미 제레야 홀 미디 통하는 치링 라이그로와 제가 걸 치리스 발로 마다나고 치리 차야 말스 제가 다양 미수제 매발라 민 치링세 따야 거요 말스 제가 다스 시디면에 따요 말 제가 되는 인자 고 다스 시지에 고래스 시여바 잠기 미디 차이리베 치링세 차이 말에 걸 민 치링세 파다고 제가 시지 여바제 내려야 안르 파다바 있네 니가 소어도 되는 두고 지금에 모여있는데 치링세 리고레스 맨 우마라기 비키시거든 어디 제가 시 랑원의 주바 다던 제네 랑원의 주바 제시지샤 내려봐 뢰다되는 니소 차오래 제가 되네 마도 안 시가요 말했어야지 베네디로 왔다 조스로 신기지 쇠제 나 쇠차위질라 될래 조스 스타베네 되네 고 조스 차바레스 지그 쇠제네 고 조스 민마다 아니야나 고 조스 차이고 말해서 토나 지 신기 통고 마 조스 말해 왔어 다 되네 신기 지 쇠제교데 가 매발라 매바질로 조스 민다야 호요 말해서 제가 딱스 시지 주부 될라파 뢰파 다 대니 초도 바텔라 아니 최대 가능성이 되는 시리에스 제가 다시디 메나 뢰파 다자 다바네 아니 매바다 지바요 말해서 대 뢰파 다시 유에나 뢰마다바네 딩웨니 디차기 말해서 제가 니소고 그래서지 라기 비게 탈도 코롱에 되어서 뒤를 최간에 쉐베네 그 다시랑 문에 주고 여봐 뢰파 다네 니소 주게 봐 자자래 니소 마주버 지요 말해서
Just to remind ourselves then of the Svatrantika view, the autonomous view. Everything that exists by way of its own nature, its inherent existence, its own characteristics or essence. Everything. But it also requires imputation by mind. That's why they don't exist truly. So everything that exists by way of its own nature and requires imputation by mind. So the Svatrantika holds everything exists requires these two characteristics or these two aspects: its own nature and imputation by mind. So, for example, if you have a person, that person needs to be named. For example, Tsering. Unless the person is named Tsering, no one will call this person Tsering. The object, the phenomenon, is a person. It exists by way of its own nature, but it also requires naming or labeling, and in this case, Tsering. Thereafter, this person being the suitable basis for being labeled as Tsering, wherever they go, they'll be known as Tsering. Likewise, with a table. This object needs to be constructed. Once it's constructed, it needs to be labeled initially, and it's called table. Thereafter, such a structure will always be called a table. But if the structure, the basis, was absent, you couldn't call it a table. So the basis of imputation needs to exist by way of its own nature to make it suitable to be labeled as a table or as Tsering. So these two elements are required for all existence. Firstly, that the object needs to exist by way of its own nature, characteristic, or essence, and it requires imputation by mind.
네 부시 계셔라 말 부들라 마도 라야마 때 민다 사회젤레 부지에 사회젤레 안콜리아 민다 사회젤레 안 민가르다나 제일 차사 민디체니 계시기로 미디 부디 민디 라고로와 제가 다우마랑기 빌라요데 제가 당부 마민 부디 민다사게 시딜레 부지 고레스 제가 부지 매바젤레 안니 그 민다 호 민다 호요 말아와스 제가 부딜레 치링세 민마다바이나 and the Puj Yorina could sitting represent how much like what mean time or time. Says Hamos, there's a Budelia and the Palu Puji Yobache. Delia Lu mean the call it mean sitting like in the asset of Ming Lu part sitting called sitting rabbit part that's a jella, then the Pud tone and the sweet horn at sitting, say Ming dead. Said out the cake, out sitting there, sure, said that Gilegua. Just I didn't to go, 다 우마랑주 비게 손타데 디시오레 다디.
Staying with the Svatrantika presentation, they would say, for example, a newborn child that hasn't yet been named by their parents would not be known by anything other than just child. Once it's been named, say Tsiring, thereafter that child will always be recognized as Tsiring. But before the child is named Tsiring, if someone comes into the maternity ward and says, "Oh, is Tsiring here?" Because no one in that room has yet been named Tsiring, one wouldn't be able to say yes. But later, should the child be named Tsiring, thereafter, or from then, it would be known by this name. So, the object requires labeling, but onto its naturally existent basis.
That then you begin Bendigo Chiputle Lupa Dagorde in a Daming Tasa Shipu Yorte in a Pukron Rango when you drew rivers and a rang when you drew a Marella water. Corang when you drew a Marcas and Pudia, you then came Mambuchile in the troop to her. It's a rang when you drew a said, Lavio Marella water. Then there Tash Ming Tasa Shidi Rang when you drew a Lavio Maresla water. That Umatenju be shed. Umatenju be Ranjuba Lagora. Korangi Pus Ming Tasagi, Pa Tashi Pudi, Mi Shidi. Kora rangon ne juba lagi duas, dela rangon ne juba lagio mares, ko rangon ne majuba lagores. Kare lamna rangon ne juba di gyudan ke matyo juba lagores, lagores. Chezan budi mingta sa shidi gyudan ke la den juba roas. Chezan gyudan ke shan la den juba za rangon ne juba lagio mares or da donda disi or.
Prasangika partially agree with Svatrantika. They agree that this newborn has to be labeled. But they do not say it exists by way of its own nature or essence or characteristics. It's not inherently existent. They say, where we agree with you, Svatrantikas, is that the baby needs to be labeled and that the baby is a dependence arising. So we agree there. Where we disagree is that it exists by way of its own nature. You say, as we saw above, that something exists inherently and dependent. So we saw that in the first line of the verse above, that something exists inherently and dependent. But this is not possible. We hold that if something is inherently existent, it could not be dependent because it exists by way of its own nature. It wouldn't be impacted by causes. So this is the view of the Prasangika. They agree with many elements of the view of the Svatrantika, but where they disagree is that any object exists inherently.
Donda de bada kuzu de basa ni yorwa donda de ba tongyi rwa kuzu de ba tongyi le jin bi che da donda be won de che ba ina rangi chin yu ba sa yo ma des da kuzu de ba tongyi ma hin bi kuzu de be won de che ba kuzu be won de che ba ne rangi chin yu ba sa yo ma des gang lai ma de ba rang won ni chu de che yo ma de donda be won de sam ta ba ne gang lai ma de rang won ni chu de che yo ma des donda ba Donne be ondo chena rangi ngone juba se do yori be sene mindu os rangi chingi juba se yo mare se da ben di yo kunzob dembala rangi chingi juba yori la ne dia yo mare se dondan dembala rangi chingi juba yori be sen dia yo mare se chesa ton dondala ji so tonyi dige demba juba re be mare se ro jine za ma ji ge donne be ondo cheba na ya rangi chingi juba se kala ma do rangi ngone juba yo mare kunzob be ondo cheba na ya Gala to Gala Matuba Rangun to the Mebad. Mebad, she can let you by now, Shanjil, Dina Juba Mother, Shanjila Matuba Juba said, "How you know your mother?" I said, "Let him you be this one."
The difference comes down to Prasangika say that no phenomenon can be established by way of its own defining characteristics, and if such a phenomenon did exist, it could not be dependent. So this is 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 completely different to the Svatantika view, which hold that phenomena are established by way of their own defining characteristics and are dependent. Whereas the Prasangika say, no phenomenon at all exists by way of its own defining characteristics, not the ultimate truth, nor the conventional truth. So whether one's talking about a phenomenon conventionally or ultimately, no phenomenon exists by way of its own defining characteristics.
Dine zada delia dingi da jungulu suru di nenye mai zadi di shesai ba dingi dale dan wi suni mai se jesa ko du shi ge chete je da da shen de jumu de jeba pa du du jeba je na wa na shi kan du jeba je du ane da da shen de je wa zao ki ni me dong san du wo le se she shi ba da de chi ran da jidin tanyi de la jidingi sa la jidingi tanyi den la se du an ganes yore lamda rang ngwen de juba sa wa gi me ra wa da an che de yo ma re be stas la ba pa juba je ba na tin ju be ka so ne jidingi tanyi den la se tanyi den ba jidin be ge tanyi bu lu yu sha ba zhe yore so da che de ge cha san dak shen je be se na wa na ju lo le na wa na ji sim ju je ba na nye me ma dong sa ji es an ne ganes ne ma da ma je ba jidingi tanyi be lu pa la da ba zhe yore so tanyi den la de number je me je se de she le sha le tanyi den jidingi tanyi den la se de jidin be tanyi be lu pa da ba zhe yore se ji den la se di ba.
For that reason, when phenomena are analyzed, other than having emptiness as their nature, nothing is found to abide. So this we've covered already, that from the perspective of the Prasangika, no inherently existent phenomenon can be found. The ultimate truth of a phenomenon is not inherently existent, nor the conventional truth of a phenomenon. Nothing that exists by way of its own nature, essence, or characteristics. And furthermore, thus truths of worldly convention. So what this means, thus truths of worldly convention, means that the way phenomena do exist conventionally is merely as mere imputations by mind. So the only way phenomena exist conventionally is as imputations by mind. So that's then the meaning of thus truths of worldly convention.
number Jimmy City, number Jimmy City, Dang Jidina, Lupa Tangy Taba, some Yuba, Tahara, Shower Mado, D. Matsimbache, Dusin Jeba Chebana, Donamla Jeba Charles, Jeba Cheba, there has been a meadow do said, and meet Kodu said, Coco Lujidin, tiny blue tabatsam, you call your mother said, Tahara Shamata, Kodu said. Jezang Anzuki, Midu, say, Kodu, 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 Kala, Sagi, such Yoruba. This is Chazan, Jidin, big Lupa, tiny blue, Tabatsam Shaharis. That Tabatsam Matsimbache, and the Kosagu Karasagidu, they say the Kare, and the Cheba Chebana, and the Koranshi Matubal Chadu, they say, Ranshi Matuma Cheba Chadu. Says the Dinicheba and the Yameba Chadu, the dinner go do Shene. Tell a number of Jimmy Jassy, now to get midi do ye said and out Jow to what Rango when you're rushing you to be rang it, you to be in the chair of mothers. Maybe in Jidimbe, tiny be wonky, shabby, wonky, that Java to get on to your down as Chasa Yedi bodies. Since did Tahara, Denigi, Delia, Tahara Jao, yes, Mado and Delia, and the Jiggy Jow to be the Carresha, Kijitambo, Nibare, Sumbare. Said the Jim Donamla Jeba Jorwa, didn't Jeba Jigoma, that's what Jimmy just said.
And the verse concludes, thus truths of worldly convention should not be thoroughly analyzed. So here, a distinction is being made in terms of two ways of analysis, the ultimate analysis and conventional analysis. The conventional analysis would be, for example, is if you're asking whether someone is here or not. So you may look around to see if someone is here or not. So you're doing a process of investigation. If you see them, they're here. If you don't see them, they're not here. But you're not, in such an instance, looking for their nature, their ultimate way of existing. You're not seeking that. You're just asking whether someone is here or not. So therefore, one needs to differentiate between ultimate analysis and conventional analysis. When one is looking for the ultimate nature of something, one will see, does it exist by way of its own essence? And as we were talking this morning, if one believes that the person's subtle mental consciousness is the person, then you'd ask yourself, which moment, the previous moment, the present moment, the future moment, which moment, and you would not be able to find the person, and the person would not exist ultimately by their way of their own nature. But that is not what is meant here. Truths of worldly convention should not be analyzed. There, one is just doing a conventional analysis and asking, for example, is the person in the room or not? So you're not seeking out their nature, but it is a way of analysis that is in accordance with worldly convention.
미디 편이 되도에 민두서 미디 편이 두두 근데 굽게 가는 되셔 시시그로와 난 디지도 하나 저기 다가랑기 차샤네 그 되셔서도 미기 통하지 편이 되셔라도 어두선 다가랑 차샤고와 맞아 될 차마샤지 지기 편이 되셔라도 알레 그 되디 미디 혈안 더 미디셔서 미디 고디레베 고디라 미디베 고디 미 마르와스 라바데레베스 라바데 마르와스 아니 가르 수구디레베스 and sheba the lebes. Then it's an penny dress midi gagires and didn't cheba in the number cheba chadu. Jesa didn't cheba and then yeah, mares or Jesa now the Jitim but they called tiny part dresses and me do a middle or called doos, penny doos and Dagara Jitim big tiny Louis Pashabat and Della Dagara Yuba Chasha mother. Della digi matsimbache and the gaggy dresses at the Gangba de Rebecca, Lao Subu de Rebecca, Quasem de Rebecca, Gaggy Suri, Midi Surias and Chebachin, the number Cheba Chargo, Denica, Deni Meniba Chargo, Deni Chigio Maris, Cheba Chigio Maris, Jimmy said.
Here in this verse, then, what we being encouraged to do is differentiate between an awareness investigating conventionalities and an awareness investigating the ultimate, in other words, emptiness. So, for example, if I was to ask is whether someone was here, then someone else may point out, yes, there they are. You perhaps can't recognize them because they're wearing a face mask. And then notice, oh, the person is here. So that's some analysis has been done, some investigation has been done, and that's an awareness investigating a conventionality, or what we have here, worldly convention. But if then we were to ask, oh, so you say they're here, really? Are you saying they are their head, or just the eyes and the top of the head that's visible? Is that really the person? Because that's all I can see. Then, of course, one is going now into ultimate analysis. And there one will find the person doesn't exist, because you would eventually not be able to find the person. You wouldn't find their nature. So one is here needing to differentiate between conventional analysis and ultimate analysis. Conventional analysis is what we do ordinarily in the world, and ultimate analysis is when we look for the ultimate way of abiding, or its nature.
제가 랑이 천유 주바세 자와기는 요 말에스 랑이 천유 주나 강라에 마되바 주고레스 강라에 마되바 주바 자와니요 최근에는 현지를 뛰는 용고레 뒤주 최근에는 현지를 뛰는 주고레스 이제 다 자와 디시고로 와 소르시.
In brief, what we keep coming back to with this in previous verses is that no phenomenon exists inherently or by way of its own nature. if such a phenomenon did exist in this way, it could not be dependent, whereas phenomena do exist dependently on other.
다 되니게 제시 당한줄야 다 되니게 현실에 되는 주상의 삼다이다 소수기 당한줄야 안지기 동화세야다 디기줄야 탈럼 간스 주도 세다디 현실에 되는 주바 삼다네 판도스케민도 선비지 되네 삼다네 소수기 동화 충도야다 아니 녀모보 마지야라 개발 가르도와 소소 디기줄야 가르 개발도 선비게다 되네 요식이 용구로 와다가 삼나 까브레라.
Now I want to address the relevance of this, the relevance of why we are looking at this. Because one may well think, all I want to do is be a good person, have peace of mind, and not experience problems and difficulties. But hearing all of this is a bit complicated, and it may not be helping. So I want to talk a little bit about the relevance of this philosophy.
미치기 소설이야 배 직두자를 콜룽 코로나 정한줄이야 직두자 납제 안직한줄이 균주 제베이나 당한줄에 그 넘주 두자로 된바이나 당한줄 남사 가서서나 남사 미디래 배 미디긴 알아 직두자라고도 미디긴 알아 넘주 두자 등도 남상아도 콘란기로 와 콘란 파래 지게 직두자라야다 아니 넘주 두자 돼야기 배셔 땅도 그러지사 내게 콘란으로 와다.
Let's take an illustration of where someone talks to us in a harsh manner, perhaps criticizing us, putting us down. So we know, almost certainly, anger is going to arise within us.
ngāla dōng nāmgyū dukshā tuyān sōng. Tēnī yā sītik ngā kōng lāng kārachīna kōng lāng kōrā yā sācī. Tātī kō sīk dukshā dā nāmgyū dukshā tuyān bātā kārachīna yunggūrā yā sā shimchū chē yu yu dā kē mē pā lā shēn lā tuyān yunggūrā, kārā lā tuyān yunggūrā sā tu kō lā yā kōng rā sā tuyā rā. Kōng rā sā bā yā tsā kōng rā sā yu kīn chē nē anā sīk kāne bā sīk dukshā tuyā dā anā lū kī nāmgyū dukshā tuyā dā kōng rā yu kīn chē lā bā rā. Chē sā kōng rā yu kīn chē lā bā sā 딩하기 직 두제 용야당 아니 류기 넘주 두제 되야데 라와 매바체 콩르이 라와 샹왕도 소제 용아 차주와 지산 디네 삼다데 오다디 류기디 직 두제라데 콩르게 제데 지산 콩르 깨와서 콩르이 원게 깨와마도 디니기 아니 원도 신이 깨와리도 와 선배가 삼러 중국으로 와다 심주제도.
On your cushion, call to mind a situation like this. Recall when someone spoke to you in a harsh manner and where anger arose within yourself. Whether you responded in an angry manner or not, just call such a situation to mind. And then apply what we've been looking at here. Everything that comes about in dependence on causes. It's not independent. This person spoke to me in this harsh manner, in this critical manner, independence on causes. Something had happened in their life, and that led to them an arisal of a particular consciousness and an expression of a particular way of speaking. Independence on what I heard and perhaps what I saw in terms of the facial expression, independence on these causes now, within myself, an affliction arose. And quite possibly, my facial expression changed, maybe more blood flowed to my face, and perhaps I spoke in a harsh manner. What we're seeing here is that both parties, the criticizer and the criticized, both are responding without control, not under their own power, but under the influence of others, or in dependence on others. So again, that person is acting under the influence of a variety of causes coming together, and so too with our response. So neither party is acting under their own control. They are not under their own self-power.
당하는 데네 하고 투기도 나는 저 가르쳐 먹었네. 파로 코너 술 잡고서네. 미들 코너서 미들 독자를 셨어. 맞아. 그 코너도 독자를 라기오 말와. 나도 코너 자데 그 코너 들라 견다고 말 미들 견다고 미들 빼 독자를 셨어 라고 봐. 제가 두 삼다도 다도 지나도 텐주베듯이 제바 제다 삼다에도 코너도 미 말와. 생각에 넘주다 네 류기 넘주 독자되게 책 독자다 류기 넘주 독자되 미디 말와. 그 코너에 미디 말와. 제가 미디 말에 지 미디랑 코너서는 never 한 무슨 얘기인지 책 독자되다 류기 넘주들랑 하는 무슨 얘기래. 네 요의 규디 거기 코너되게 잡아래. 지 미디랑 코너 사고 좀 잘 가려서 그 미당 코너들이 니 가가러 왔어. 세상에 디 노트 샤기도 와. 제가 당아 두치데 갈 갑도 술 쪼고서네. 거기 코너들 갑도 쪼고도 왔어. 책 독자라야 돼 용사다. 류기 넘주 독자 용사디 거기 코너들이 있었어. 다 코너들 갑도 쪼고도. 진짜 코너들랑 반뇌기고도 생각해. 다 코너들 뇌기라 나랑 저 코너 사바이나 안 가르치게 됐으네. 페이 코너도 슈체로 그러와. 진짜 나도 코너 사바나 아니 코로 파죠 폰 코너들 팽구어래. 그래서 그 코너도 누가 챘던 거로 봐. 나도 가서 그 코너를 뇌고 그러 그 코너들 봐 매봐서야 뇌나 그 매봐서야 차고 봐. 다 매봐서야 간에 차기라나. 그래서 소수기 코로 많아지 쇠복금 소수기 쇠복 좀 셈마주바지 셈마주를 들려야 안딜이야 안지게 그 잠재기 토네 안지게 두스 넘겨 돼야래 안 잠재기 토네 그 반뇌배 삼바마다지 잠재기 삼다지 아니 그 탑시 가르치고네 탑시 제베네 소수기 잠재 삼다네 코로 말하나 아니 거기 코르드 마마 길기리 히로래 제가 되니게 뇌기 진짜 아주 잠재기 토네 아니 그 코르 시투에 제거래 제가 되니 참 도치네 덴지기다 덴네 따바 제디 도시네 삼다이도 규단建立 덴도 중화래 삼다이도 제가 아주 그 코르 매바 쇠디 아주 규가르고도 제비 규자디 델야 안 님볼 마스네 규드만데 아주 잠바다 제와 삼다 안 디토네 탑람 삼다메이든 그 코르 시투에 차도 우리 에서지 당한 저기 덴지기 신래 뛰는 주고래 까마티가 두고 요마래 세비 삼다이도 제가 동게 넘겨다 나기 치수티 아니 컨트롤에 뛰는 용고래 제가 컨트롤이 매바 써야 돼 유신지를 뛰는 매바 쓰고래 유신 년보지를 뛰는 매바 쓰고래 이 컨트롤이 년보 매바 써 년보디 가르를 뛰는 매바 쓰고서는 잠재게 삼라디 뛰는 매바 쓰고래 해서 어두 진행하는 저기도 삼다이도 소수게 냠을 야다 두시네 덴지게 남자 삼다이도 디 제바제야다 디치되네 어두시네 소수게 신행기 코로사베네 델레 서버권 투야다 델레 잠재 삼당 투야 디 땅와라 데네 파쇼기 안에 콘드디 시투야 파쇼 콘로 시투바는 파쇼 미딜레 셈기보다 셈 흘려요야 소소 콘로 마자바 소수게 잠재 삼당에자 소수에 흘려요 되게 아니 디제네 소수게 잠재 투네 파쇼 콘로디 시투바이네 소수에 앞에 야고 중수로 로데고 줘야다 디자 디네장 저기 현래 뛰는 주바레 현마도 주바 요마레 电见这话中国人具体了的没办法出来是呗，但的那个上当那的的那个必须当下来样子必须结婚或者话的。
Through what I've just presented, one can see how both yourself and the other person are really no different. In dependence on causes, a result comes about. So in dependence on, for example, from our perspective, the words this person has said, the tone, their facial expression, as well as other causes such as the meaning that we place from past experiences onto those words, we respond in a particular way. Spontaneously, it arises within us. That's the case for ourselves, and it will be the same for the other person too. So here we immediately equalize ourselves with the other. And this helps us to refrain from so readily looking down at them, responding to them aggressively. But moreover, we then can take the reflection deeper. And when now in meditation, we're recalling a past event where we did get perhaps annoyed or angry with the person. Look at how then we are viewing, or at that time we viewed this person. We were criticizing them. In our mind, or perhaps in our speech, we were criticizing this person. We may well have a thought of, once again, you are like this. You are always like this. And what we are confusing here is a particular emotion or consciousness, in this case perhaps anger, that has arisen in this person. We are confusing that consciousness with the person. And this is where we end up saying, you are an angry person, you are an arrogant person. We end up from our side confusing a consciousness with a person. We are confusing their habituation to a way of thinking, consciousnesses, with the person. The person is not a consciousness. If we seek out the person, we will not find it in any single consciousness. So we are confusing an aspect of their personality, a characteristic of this person, with the person. Here, we are the ignorant ones. We are the ones making a mistake. Almost certainly the other person is doing exactly the same thing. But we need to recognize our own error here. And this can help to deal with our pride that looks down on this person for being, however we have been mistakenly labeling them as an angry person, a proud person, or what it may be. And then we can rather remind ourselves, this person is responding habitually to whatever is going on for them. I can either continue to respond habitually like I have been, or I can apply the teachings and remind myself what is arising before me is just a display of causes arising and from causes results arising. Within me, I don't have to grasp at this appearance as true. I can recognize it just as the process of dependency playing itself out. When the causes meet the ripening conditions, there's the result. No surprise. I don't have to grasp at this. I can rather recognize this display for what it is. That this is a person right now who's suffering, and they're suffering because the afflictions are dominating their mind. I don't need to add to this. They are already in pain. I have a responsibility of someone who at least aspires for the paths of a bodhisattva, not to grasp at this, but rather to accept that this is a suffering being who actually doesn't wish any harm for me. Their causes, their seeds, have just met the ripening conditions, and they're acting without any control. Thinking like this, our attitude becomes one of patience, not one of habitually responding with pride or anger, but one of patience. We understand and we accept this person for who they are, and we can now respond more skillfully, recognizing that if I were to respond in an habitual way, and an affliction such as anger, the two angry minds meeting just leads to an explosion. Rather, with patience arising, I can respond with wisdom, generate love for the suffering person, and respond in a more skillful way. And by responding in a more skillful way, this person's anger will dissipate. They may be surprised that I've apologized, surprised that I'm saying, I'll think about what you've said, surprised that I'm not responding in kind. And therefore their anger dissipates. And by acting more skillfully like this, the situation is calmed, I gain more skill, and I can go through life with a mind that's undisturbed, not grasping at appearances as being truly existent, not grasping at appearances as existing in the way that they appear. I can move through life with ease. I can move through life with a mind of peace and act in a harmonious way with others. So this is how to apply the theory, the philosophy of what is learned here in a way that is truly practical.
Bendigo Namsha Ta Jebacheta some Tanadi, Anzuki Ganga Celia, Lucian Bishita Vena, Ganga Tindi, that could say to your Chazan Tiniza, to Kondo Maki, Yomo Maki, Chava, Chava Yungure, Shengi Yomo Java Nation, Shengi Yomo Yama, Shushun Tayalia, and the Chava Yungure, Tinisha, Tiniki Gang to Chiwadi, Bish some Dinitalia, Bish down to Vadi, Getchimucha, Chazan.
I encourage you to listen to these teachings again, reflect on their meaning again and again. I do this, and I encourage you to do it as well. Because as we become more skilled, we'll recognize I'm going into a situation where the causes for the afflictions to arise will be met. I need to be on guard and ensure the afflictions do not arise. Likewise, as we become more mindful, more self-aware, we'll see the rise of the afflictions, and we'll know that not only is it inappropriate, but these are wrong consciousnesses. And we will not grasp at these appearances before us that are leading to the risal, or that are causes for the risal of anger or pride. And rather, by not grasping, the afflictions will dissipate. So I encourage you to reflect on this again and again.
Alright, the Nil Shebanashi, Sosole Ganga Chundu Gablina, and the Gamadi, and the city Shanla Dudan, Shanla Duna Jur, Chazan Ranglamaza, Shanla Dune, Shangi Ganga, Rangle, Shangi Ganga Che, some Tawena, and Dusine, Ganga Tusipe, some Tawena, Delia, and Rangi Ganga, some Tadi, somebody just Chun Droyatidan, Anji Shanla, on a lady that you console, Geshe, Shakonzo Ganga Che, Shakonzo Ganga, the Seawood, some Dayadu, and around to get. Chikia and Chick Gang Dolmas, Seva, Sevi, Yamlan Masona, Dunga Dine, Seva, Silly, Chesa, two Dinega, some Tawalatine, Down, Chesa, Della Tawalatine, Rangi, some Lope, Busto, Tandiva, some Chun to war, which is that dinner, she said, Shengi, Dene, and Dunga Chun Tadi, the Negi told him to get. That the show the Sheva Nashing do to and some Yamlin to check to a or the Kitchen Chagua.
And the second point, I just want to repeat. So the second point to really take away from today is don't allow your mind to be overwhelmed by one's own problems and difficulties. I know everyone here has hardships in your life, problems and difficulties in your life, unwanted circumstances. But through thinking in the way I advised earlier, one can open one's mind and not self-obsess with one's own problems. Just by reminding ourselves of how difficult the lives of so many beings are right now, we can lift our gaze up from ourselves and our own concerns and see all that we have that is of great fortune. And this can give us some mental space, and our closed, narrow mind can slowly open. And this is crucial, because it enables there to be more space within ourselves for others. Thank you then. We'll conclude here and continue with the next verse next time. So thank you very much.